Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar on bank account management and structures, the second in a series of webinars on bank fee management. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we consider sound principles of bank account management and structures relevant to organizations of varying complexity and size. Our speakers for today are Jason Campbell, Business Development Leader at Strategic Treasurer, and Craig Jeffrey, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Jason and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Brian. We really appreciate it. You do a wonderful job every time, so really do appreciate it. And I'm so excited today to have the opportunity to co-present this great topic with the great Craig Jeffrey. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for sharing some of your time through this afternoon. If you're on the East Coast, or if you're on the West Coast, you're almost to that afternoon on this lovely Wednesday. And for those who are international, wherever you may be, thank you for joining. We really do appreciate it. So this is going to be a great, robust 28 minutes of some really good impact of information to be able to hopefully jar some good dialogue discussions within your internal circle around, bank account management, and preferably some key takeaways as you think about your planning, your forecasting, or what the things that you have going on around your banking setup as you currently have, and what it's going to look like in the future. So let's go into our topics of discussion for today. So today we're going to talk about some influences and really about increasing the need for sound bank account management and structures. Dive into enhancing efficiency, both structural and operational, account management, how to optimize uses and fees, and then those key takeaways of hopefully that through this next 27 minutes that we do have, you'll have some good things that you can hopefully advance your goals and your agenda. So let's go talk about increasing the need, and really kind of both for the practitioners and for the banks. So as we think about, that increasing need of sound bank account management and structures with a lot of noise that's been happening for quite some time that we continuously hear, and hopefully that noise will start to kind of get a little bit less and less. But we've experienced some bank failures recently, Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, First Republic. Are there other banks that potentially could meet that same fate? And how much is available out there for the central banks to help save some of these banks from any potential disasters? Those forced mergers, we got Credit Suisse, and potentially what other forced mergers may be out there. And then some other concerns to consider. Fed rates, we just recently went at those 25 basis points not too long ago. Is it really going to be, some pausing going on, or is there another rate increase? There's a lot of speculation about which one is going to do. Recession, the R word, we've been hearing it for quite some time, that geopolitical, what that looks like, and obviously the regulatory pieces. And when we think about from banking itself and those who are on the line from the banking industry, the relationships, instilling confidence within your clients and, and ensuring, that you have their best interests at heart, and, ensuring that trying to reinforce what you have going on within your organization and how you're still able to, be there to put those confidence in. It's going to be, those are really impactful items to also consider and thinking about ways to drive both efficiency and optimization, and ensuring that fair market pricing is actually happening and fair market is across on both sides of the table. We really also, too, we think about operational, those increasing needs about growth, and as well as complexity of your organization and, what you have now, and obviously what your footprint is for the future. So when we think about, let's dive into that growth and complexity and really into the drivers of transformation. And on this screen here, just kind of paints a little bit of a picture of some things to think about, some provoking your thoughts there about, what's going on, or what's been going on, what's currently going on, and when maybe what's down the road or what's about to happen. And as you think about your enterprise, really, some drivers of transformation, think about expansions, acquisitions. Maybe there's been some restructuring that's been going on, product line changes, whether it's been an increase of product lines, maybe a downsizing, even perhaps investing itself, where you're putting your eggs in your baskets, and then as well as your size of staff. All of those are things to consider from a complexity. What may have been your organizational structure 10, 15, 20 years ago has it changed? Have you evolved your banking relationships? Have you evolved within your banking structure? Those things are going to matter as you start to think about, are you currently in the right position to be able to drive efficiency and optimization and revenue streams? Have you been a series of growth recently, and maybe 3 years ago you're $300 million and now you're $1.8 billion, or whatever your operation is. All those things come to consider that, looking at how your bank accounts are, and is it setting you and your organization up for success? And that's the most important pieces of thinking about being a steward of your business. So, and this leads us into our first polling question, Craig. And I know how well we love polling questions in our webinars, so I'm going to let you take it from here, sir.
Yeah, that sounds good. We should have a poll question. How many think that Jason's up for his annual review with the comment he made at the beginning? So that was pretty obvious. Yeah, so there's two poll questions up, compounded in one view frame. If you can't find it, look in the notes. Brian has some instructions there. Select all that apply. So this is elements of complexity for the first one. We have, this is moderate plus complexity. Any individual category there, we have over 100 bank accounts, 2 billion in annual turnover or sales. Go ahead and select which ones fit the bill. And then the bottom one is, we use the following from a cash concentration or pooling structure. What are people using to manage the complexity of their bank accounts and to concentrate funds properly? So go ahead and do that. Then after you've done that, if you're interested in seeing the poll results, type the word BAM, bank account management, in the webinar chat box. And we're going to ask for just 100 today, only 100. Go ahead and type that in so we don't have to keep saying it. If you type the word poll, you're good. But we're going to go with BAM just to keep it focused on topic. So, and again, just as people are filling that out, for those on Zoom, it's good to see your chat and activity. For those on LinkedIn Live, I think Jason and I aren't looking at the chat and discussions there, but you're with us in spirit, and glad that you're connecting through that additional channel. So, so as we go, let's see what we find out. Jason, as I look at this, about 3/10, none of the above. And so those would be kind of on the less complex side. It could be simple, it could be complex, but you can see we've got about the same number, over 2 billion in sales. 4 out of 9 have over 100 bank accounts. A quarter have over 10 banks. So, depending on you put these together, probably the average audience is complex to hyper complex, with a sizable minority that would be moderate complex to perhaps a little bit of a simpler structure there. As we look down at the bottom, two-thirds use a cash concentration structure, concentration account, for example, or a header account, depending on where you're domiciled, and the terms that you use. Physical and notional pool, we can see those numbers. In-house bank at 21%. Yeah, I think, Brian, maybe we'll try to combine these from the same webinar we did yesterday at a different time, see how this shakes out. But this looks pretty close to yesterday, Jason. Does that seem about right?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's actually really, really close. And I think when you talk about complexity, and it really hits on that previous slide, right? When you think about that hyper complex organizational structures, and it seems like there'd be a good time to really kind of revisit that their banking structure as a whole, and seeing if they're sitting in the right spot still.
Great. I'm told we need 23 more responses with the word BAM in the chat box to hit our number. But yes, we'll move past the poll question onto optimizing bank structure. So, so as that shows up on your screen, the first area, why do you optimize your banking structure? Well, for good cash management principles, one of those is visibility. Where's my cash? What bank? What accounts? What country? What currencies? What entities do I have them in? And then beyond that, what's in the bank accounts? What about the investment and debt side? And how we optimize our structures, concentrating into certain banks who can perform that function, or having all of this information reported back so you have full visibility. Those are no longer nice to have. It's a commercially reasonable process to have visibility to all your accounts on a daily basis. That's a cost of doing business. Now, how you do that and how you do that efficiently is another effective decision, but it's something that should be done. And as we look at optimizing bank structures, there can be different reasons. Managing financial risk. This could be how money moves in and out of your bank accounts. Do you have all these payment flows documented? And usually people answer that yes or almost yes. And what we really find out is you understand and know the major flows, but there's other flows that you may not be aware of. We usually find it's about 50 or 60% to 100% more than people, notate when they first get into a project to look at that. And that's pretty significant because how can you control all of your flows and cash management activity if you don't know where the flows are? How do you protect what you don't know or don't see? Or it's something you could have thought about, but it's not on the radar. It's off to the side that has to be looked for. Looking up at the upper right-hand side, we see connectivity. This idea of if I need visibility and I need to be able to move funds and I need to be able to do that for good cash management purposes, but also for good disaster recovery and contingency planning, i.e. maybe I have to move from a bank who's in trouble or I don't want to keep above a certain amount in a particular bank, particularly when the news is bad. Do I have the ability to move that quickly and to see it and to be able to respond? Do I get timely information, or am I living in a world that acts not much differently than if it was 1980? For those of you who were around in 1980, things were a lot slower. And for those that weren't around, things were a lot slower. And this idea of how do we concentrate funds efficiently are very important across the board. But when we think about bank structures as well, as we contemplate what we're doing, this optimize, know your customer is an issue. This is one of the biggest pains that companies identify and the banks identify. They are in agreement with that. Why do I have to send utility bills? I have to send my real passport in. It certainly becomes a challenge for companies. And so this idea of how do we optimize what goes on with setting up accounts, manage those, and controlling those has implications for the core KYC, but also things like foreign bank account reporting in the U.S., the new beneficial ownership information that has to be reported if you have beneficial ownership interest in a company. So there's new requirements and new regulations from the setup to the management of that activity. And I'll leave the others off for a moment for the rest of this discussion. But there's a number of reasons why we focus on different areas of the banking structure. So let's flip over to linear to global. Now, if you have children, sometimes you learn about linear learners, global learners, or if you remember that from college, perhaps, what's a linear thinker or global thinker? This is not meant to be put one against the other. Both are really important in the thinking end of things, but for purposes here, as linear as things are put in order or you incrementally add stuff, always optimizing it for the individual ad. Whereas global is looking at the picture as a whole. And this is the challenge for many organizations is they've come from a linear world where things get added slowly over time. You don't start with a blank sheet of paper. You start with whatever's there. And then someone else's sheet of paper comes in from the companies you've acquired, businesses you've taken over. And over time, that becomes complex. And so this idea of global is what's efficient if you were starting off today. So what's the better approach? We think about things like the banking structure. Is it unintegrated? You have certain acquisitions you've done, and then there's this manual process where you're moving funds to get it to flow and optimize your use of cash, or are using modern cash management principles, tools, technology, and services offered by your bank or by other providers. Like maybe you've heard things about virtual accounts or different types of pooling, physical pooling with the ZVA structure, et cetera. So there's different options. The other thing is, as we move from linear to global, accounting can be very fragmented. Some of it's done by, AP or AR or another area. Some's done by Treasury. But what is done from a systematic perspective? Is Treasury the owner of cash? And does that mean all cash accounting is controlled by Treasury, that the cash book of record might be the Treasury system you're using? And how do you record those entries? It's done manually. Do you use rules? Do you use logic-based rules? Do you use machine learning enhanced logic-based rules? Things that help a good controlled process go on. And so that fits into the overall look of how do I set up my cash management structure, my bank account structure? It should be set up for Treasury purposes, with Treasury at the core and the root of that. It should not be set up for accounting purposes, designed first for accounting purposes. But what that means is it should be set up for Treasury and cash management purposes and efficiency that contemplates some of the other needs, like accounting, like the different business areas to support their needs. So it has to contemplate those, but it should first be set up to address Treasury's needs. The other element I want to talk about on this particular slide is relationship management. Now, relationship management with banks is vital. Why is it vital? For many organizations, banks provide significant capital. They provide advice. They provide institutional support over time, over years, decades, maybe even centuries. And these relationships matter, and they matter to the organization more than any one person at a company to one person at a bank. And so relationship management can be kind of informal. It's in my head, or it's in individual handwritten notes and folders that I have, or it's maintained properly at an institutional level so that whether you move in or out or someone else moves in or out, that institutional relationship is documented, managed, and nourished. Not sure why I use the word nourish, but I think you know what I mean. But your bankers provide, do call notes every time they call you, every time they visit you. They have, here's what we talked about, here's what was discussed, here's what was decided, any follow-up. They're intentional about looking at you as a company. And as a company, you should be documenting calls with your bankers, particularly with your top tier bankers. What's being said? What are you saying? What are you promising? What are you asking? What are they delivering? So that there's an institutional knowledge and awareness of that. Now, this progression is there's quite a bit more on this slide that we could go over in the hour version of this webinar, but we have a half-hour version. So I'm going to let you see the slides, and using your creativity, you can fill that out. But let's go to our second poll question. 2-question plans. We have the following. So the top 3 are, pick one of those. You could select all of them, but please only select one of the top 3. And then of the bottom 3, select one of those as well. One's about the bank relationship plan, and the bottom 3 are about banking contingency plan, relevant for today. The last one is, would you like information on our 2 educational podcast channels, Treasury Update Podcast and the Open Treasury Podcast? So yes, we'll make sure we send a link for that. No, and we will pester you less. While you're answering those and hitting submit, if you look in the webinar chat box, you can follow CTM File or Strategic Treasurer. Please do. That makes our marketing team happy. And Jason and I would both like to connect with you on LinkedIn as well. So just submit it there. We'll connect. If we're already connected, awesome. And if not, let's do that. There's a moment to do it. And I think Brian's letting me know that we need about 4 more people to type the word BAM in the chat box so that we send out all the responses, all the poll questions. So we're covered. Here are the plans. Formal bank relationship plan. This is a good group, 47%. That's awesome. Informal, it's in somebody's head. And 70, 80, 92% of those that responded picked one of those 3. And it looks like 72% picked the formal contingency plan, informal. The other question is how formal, how many, how much more formal have those banking contingency plans gotten in the last few months? In 2008, 2009, that picked up and then became forgotten, like those who rebuild on the floodplains. When there's periods of stability, we don't do that. When there's periods of change, that shifts. 20% don't have it. 30% have an informal bank contingency plan. That's something we'd certainly recommend. So 61% would like information on the podcast channels. You're my heroes. And those that don't, that's what it is. All right, so we'll keep going. I think, Jason, I'm on this one too. So it's bank account management. So we look at this chart. We've got 5 different areas. I'm going to touch on a few of them. We look at this topic. The whole webinar series is called bank fee. It's part of the bank fee management series, but I would say bank fees are part of bank account management, are part of relationship management. So just because it's a series, you can pick it at the top level or lower level. We just pick the series at the lower level, but here we're pulling up. So relationships, we spoke about those, this idea of how important are your banks? How do you stay important to your banks over time and institutionally? You have a plan, you have honest communication, you calculate what you think your value is to them. How are you divvying up what you can pay them with your credit, with your operational activity, card, any other services, to make sure you're compensating your banks properly. And so that's a share of wallet. You also want to make sure you're paying the right fees within that, a more appropriate range. And Jason will talk to you about that as well. But this is the value of spending time thinking through what relationships are important and how will you be important to your banks. Your banks look at you and they do calculations such as RAROC, or risk-adjusted return on capital, to say, based on your level of risk, are they getting the return that makes sense? They have to be stewards of their balance sheet, and they look at you in that way. And you should look at your banks in terms of, are you being important to them? That's important institutionally. I'll jump over to the setting up critical wires and transfers. In times of stress, we want to make sure we have a backup method for moving funds. To use a portal, if you leverage some network or a network like Swift, you set up drawdown transfers, so you have at least a couple of ways to move funds in and out of banks as a normal contingency or as normal backup. That should be at least part of your contingency planning with banks. On the policy compliance side, that gets people angry. It's frustrating, so I won't get you too frustrated, but know your customers, a significant challenge. Bank account management is what we're talking about. Foreign bank account reporting is one of those challenging items. Many companies create a different definition for signers than FinCEN has. FinCEN signer is what you and I would consider a signer, but it's also someone who has access to an electronic system, such as a portal, that by themselves or in conjunction with another person can move or approve the movement of funds. And those are signers under FBAR. And some people say, no, those aren't signers because they're not listed as a signer at a bank, yet they can move funds. So go with the actual definition that FinCEN uses and win the argument at the party. Beneficial ownership information. There's some new requirements coming out January 1st, 2024, that you have to report by then. I believe the other day I mentioned it, reporting by the tax date in the US of April 15th. It is reporting, it has to begin by January 1st, 2024 for existing accounts, for existing entities. Now, there's a lot of information that we'll have other webinars. Brian will make the pitch for attending another webinar on that. I'm going to leave off on this topic just for the sake of time. Turn it over to Brian. I'll turn it over to Jason instead to talk about some fees.
Brian, Jason, we just respond. No worries. So, what would be a bank fee management webinar without talking about fees, right? So Craig gave us a ton of information on those things. And, one thing that I think about in my day-to-day life is I'm not always looking for the cheapest, way of spending. I look at the fair way of spending, right? And I think, from stewards of good businesses, you want to look at and say, hey, how do I have good relationships with, on both sides of the table, having fair market price conversations? And I think that's fair to have. right? So with rising deposit costs, it's expected that bank fees will be increasing. And knowing where that route is going, right? And that's all about relationships and talking with your banking partners. There's more attractive investment options with increased rates, such as earnings credit rating, money market accounts, et cetera. There's plenty of options there. So it's knowing exactly, hey, where we're going to have the best step forward, ensuring that we're maximizing the opportunities. And with fees increasing, again, you're want to looking at, are you optimizing your services within your current banking structure and services? And these are three big questions. And they're questions that maybe you have it all under your thumb and you have a really good process in place, but maybe you just need some help and assistance. There are services out there like Strategic Treasure that may be able to help you, understand a little bit more about how to manage your fees more effectively, or just simple help like, hey, I need a game plan, I need an assessment. There are organizations such as Strategic Treasure that we can absolutely assist you, and we'd be more than happy to do that. And then it rolls into the next slide. So some key takeaways as we think about, as we start to round this session out here. The road mapping. The road mapping is a very important and critical piece, right? And it's having a plan, a structure. As we were talking about the polling, do you have a contingency plan, or maybe you have a bank account management plan? All those types of things are important, of knowing exactly where you are, or where have you been, where you are, and where you're trying to get to. And think about in those environments, the positions, and obviously the destinations. And then as we just talked about managing fees, when we think about managing fees, benchmarking. When's the last time you benchmarked your fees? Or maybe you have and you're in a great spot. That's awesome. And maybe it's just time to kind of revisit and look at it and see if there's opportunity there. ECR rates are on the rise. Are you in the best position to maximize and take advantage of those opportunities that are out there? And then really that relationship perspective is having those, whether you're having conversations with your relationship banker, whether that's monthly, maybe semi-annual or annual, but you have something in place. And it was great to see that, the vast majority of those who answered the poll had a formalized plan in place already, which is great. And for those who don't have that, and maybe it's a great time to kind of revisit it and really establish some more formal approach to your banking relationship. Craig, what do you think about that?
I think that's great. On the increase, the following: visibility, liquidity, connectivity, and efficiency. This is really what's commercially reasonable, and move to that. I think that's really what I want to leave you with. You should be able to see all your accounts every day, sometimes current day, but certainly on a prior day basis. The last point here on the 4 pillars is the banking structure contingency plans. Everyone will pay attention because of what's happened. You have a primary and secondary bank. Make sure you get a secondary bank in place so that you can transfer as needed, even if it's a 80-20 shift for companies of any significant size, and have a plan for being able to move funds quickly. Do it now, set it up. If you have any questions, let us know. Turn it over to you, Brian.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And for more on bank account compliance, specifically FBAR and BOI, that is beneficial ownership information, be sure to register for our webinar on this topic by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.